Welcome back to True Crime Documentary YouTube channel. The Stockdale family lived in a small rural town in Beach City, Ohio. From the outside, they seemed like any ordinary close-knit family. However, behind the seemingly wholesome facade lay a strict authoritarian regime that would eventually lead to the brutal deaths of two family members. The story of the Stockdale family massacre is not only tragic, but also sheds light on the destructive consequences of control, isolation, and mental illness. Tim and Kathy Stockdale were devoutly religious parents who decided to move away from the city to a remote farm in Beach City, Ohio. They had 4 sons: Calvin, Charles, Jacob, and James. The Stockdales were determined to raise their children with strong Christian values, believing that the best way to achieve this was by isolating them from the outside world. The family's home became more like a prison than a sanctuary, with strict rules enforced by Kathy, who was known to be a particularly harsh mother. Kathy imposed rigid routines for the boys, rewarding them with meager prizes such as the privilege of listening to a radio show or completing chores without complaint. But the rules were not just about work. They extended to every aspect of the boys' lives. They were prohibited from watching TV, playing video games, or interacting with anyone outside the family. Kathy believed that any form of entertainment or socializing with outsiders was sinful and potentially dangerous. She went so far as to forbid her sons from dating or talking to girls, fearing that it would lead to unwanted consequences like pregnancy. Despite these harsh rules, there was a glimmer of joy in the family's life. The Stockdales shared a love for bluegrass music, and the boys showed a natural musical talent. Jacob, in particular, became a fiddle-playing prodigy. By the age of 7, he had mastered the instrument and went on to win awards across Ohio, eventually becoming the Ohio State Grand Fiddle Champion in 2012. The family even formed a band, with Calvin playing the banjo, Charles on the mandolin, James on the upright bass, and Jacob on the fiddle. Tim Stockdale fronted the band as the lead vocalist and guitarist. They performed at local events and gained a following, showcasing their musical talents. But despite their musical success, the boys were deprived of the freedom to lead normal childhoods. They were confined to the strict environment created by their parents, with no opportunity to explore the world beyond their home. Even their education was controlled by Kathy, who homeschooled them with a religiously centered curriculum. Instead of learning science or mathematics, the boys were taught biblical stories, further reinforcing the isolation from the real world. Life on the farm was far from idyllic. The Stockdales believed in living a pure life, but in doing so, they created an environment that was unhealthy for their children's development. The boys were raised in isolation, with no contact with peers, no exposure to popular culture, and no opportunity to form relationships outside of the family. By the early 2000s, a TV show called Wife Swap became popular, offering a glimpse into the lives of families with vastly different lifestyles. The show would swap wives or mothers for a few weeks, creating a dramatic clash of values and traditions. The Stockdale boys, eager for a change, convinced their parents to participate in the show in 2008. Little did Kathy know, this decision would set off a chain of events that would ultimately result in her death. The producers of Wife Swap were intrigued by the Stockdale family's strict, controlled way of life. They paired Kathy with the Tonkovich family from Illinois, who were polar opposites of the Stockdales. The Tonkoviches allowed their children to stay up late, eat fast food, and dress however they wanted. Lori Tonkovich, the matriarch of the Tonkovich family, was shocked when she stepped into the Stockdale home. She was horrified by the regimented lifestyle, where the boys had to complete chores, follow a strict routine, and earn tokens for small pleasures like listening to the radio. Kathy's rules were incredibly strict. The boys had only 4 minutes to get to the breakfast table, after being woken up, or they would be fined 25 cents. After their chores, they were required to homeschool in isolation from other children. The strictness extended to their diet, with Kathy preparing every meal herself and never allowing the boys to eat out at restaurants. The Tonkovich matriarch, Laurie, was horrified by how regimented and controlled the Stockdale boys' lives were, and she made it her mission to introduce them to some of the things they had missed out on, like TV and video games. However, the boys' response to these new experiences was telling. Jacob, in particular, was deeply disturbed by the idea of watching TV. He broke down in tears, terrified that he would go to hell if he watched it. His deep indoctrination and fear of sin made it difficult for him to enjoy what Laurie was trying to offer him. The contrast between Laurie's liberal approach to parenting and Kathy's authoritarian regime was stark, and it seemed clear that Kathy had little interest in changing her methods. Even after the show ended, the Stockdale family didn't change. Kathy remained as strict as ever, and her children continued to live under her control. But over the years, the boys began to leave home, seeking independence and distance from their parents. Calvin went off to college in Michigan, and Charles headed to Philadelphia to become a medical student. Jacob, however, remained in the family home, along with his younger brother, James. By 2017, only Jacob and James were still living at home. Jacob, now in his mid-20s, was still living under the strict influence of his mother, but the question remained, why did he stay? Jacob had the option to leave, yet he chose to remain in the small town of Beach City. There is speculation that Jacob might have felt trapped, unable to break free from the oppressive environment his mother had created. It is also possible that Jacob did not know who he was without the rigid structure his parents imposed on him. On June 15, 2017, the tragedy that had been brewing for years finally erupted. At around 4:36 a.m., the Stark County Police received a disturbing 911 call from the Stockdale residence. The caller abruptly hung up, and the police rushed to investigate. When they arrived, they heard a loud bang from inside the house. Upon entering, they found Jacob with a self-inflicted shotgun wound to his head. He was still alive but in critical condition, and the presence of the firearm next to him suggested that the wound was not accidental. As the police searched the house, they discovered the bodies of Kathy and James. Both had been killed with shotgun blasts. Tim Stockdale, fortunately, was outside at the time of the incident and was spared from being a victim. The tragedy left everyone in shock, and the only reasonable explanation was that Jacob had murdered his mother and brother before attempting to take his own life. The motive behind the killings remained a mystery. Some speculated that Jacob was simply overwhelmed by years of strict discipline and emotional repression. Others suggested that he may have been driven to murder by a desire to escape the control of his mother. Whatever the reason, Jacob's actions left a devastating mark on the family, and the community struggled to understand how such a tragedy could occur. After the massacre, Jacob was rushed to a hospital where doctors treated his injuries. His survival was uncertain, but he eventually recovered enough to stand trial. The investigation into the killings was ongoing, but there were few answers about what had driven Jacob to commit such a horrific act. In 2018, Jacob was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of his mother and brother. His bail was set at $1 million, but the legal process was slow. Jacob's defense attorney filed a motion to determine his competency to stand trial. In the following months, Jacob underwent numerous mental health evaluations to assess whether he was fit for trial. Jacob's mental state became a central issue in the case. He had spent over a year in a mental health facility, and there were doubts about his ability to fully understand the legal proceedings. Jacob's family, despite the tragic killings, seemed to show compassion for him, suggesting that they might have forgiven him due to their strong Christian beliefs. In 2021, nearly 4 years after the massacre, Jacob finally pleaded guilty to the murders of Kathy and James. In exchange for his guilty plea, he was sentenced to 15 years for each murder, with the possibility of parole in 2048. The Stockdale family, despite everything, appeared to support Jacob and continued to plead for a lenient sentence. The question of what drove Jacob to kill his mother and brother remains unanswered. Some psychologists have suggested that Kathy may have suffered from a severe form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, which could explain her rigid control over her children. The boys' upbringing was marked by isolation, emotional repression, and a lack of freedom. It's possible that Jacob, like his mother, suffered from OCD, and the stress of living in such an environment pushed him to the breaking point. Another theory is that Jacob simply snapped. Years of living under strict rules and constant surveillance could have created a sense of resentment and anger in Jacob. Perhaps he sought revenge on his mother for the years of abuse and control. Alternatively, Jacob might have killed James out of a desire to protect him from the same fate that had befallen him. Whatever the motive, the Stockdale family massacre is a tragic reminder of the dangers of extreme parenting styles and the importance of mental health care. The isolation, control, and manipulation that defined the Stockdale family's way of life ultimately led to a devastating tragedy that claimed the lives of 2 people. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Be sure to check out our other videos for more captivating stories. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.